You were promised something quietly. Not happiness, not meaning. Comfort. A life without friction, without boredom, without prolonged discomfort. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, that promise reshaped you. You reach for stimulation the moment silence appears. You seek relief the moment tension rises. You distract yourself before a thought can deepen. And you call this freedom. But have you noticed how exhausted this freedom feels? How quickly pleasure turns into restlessness? How easily enjoyment slips into compulsion? How often you feel empty after getting what you wanted? Huxley saw this coming. He understood that the most effective form of control is not force, but pleasure. Not pain, but sedation. Because a person who is constantly entertained never needs to be threatened. They only need to be distracted. You don't feel enslaved. That's the brilliance of it. You feel indulged, comforted, pacified. Your cravings are met instantly. Your boredom anesthetized immediately. Your discomfort softened before it can teach you anything. And yet, something is wrong. Your attention feels fragmented. Your desires feel shallow. Your inner life feels thin. You scroll, you consume, you escape. Not because life is unbearable, but because you've lost tolerance for depth, for waiting, for effort, for frustration. So ask yourself something uncomfortable. If pleasure was meant to make you free, why does it now feel like something you can't stop chasing? The soft chains you don't feel. No one forced this on you. That's the part that makes it so difficult to see. There were no commands, no threats, no visible cages. Only options. Endless options. Something to watch, something to eat, something to buy, something to feel immediately. And at first, it felt like progress. Life became smoother, faster, more comfortable. Any hint of discomfort could be neutralized within seconds. Any boredom drowned out. Any restlessness soothed. But Huxley understood something unsettling. When pleasure becomes constant, it stops being pleasure. It becomes regulation. You no longer seek pleasure for joy. You seek it to avoid feeling anything else. Silence becomes unbearable. Waiting becomes intolerable. Depth becomes exhausting. You reach for stimulation not because you want it, but because you can't not. This is the new form of slavery. Not chains that restrict movement, but comforts that restrict awareness. You begin to notice it in your own mind. How quickly you check something when a thought grows uncomfortable. How reflexively you distract yourself when emotion deepens. How rare it has become to stay with a feeling long enough to understand it. Pleasure interrupts the inner process. It keeps you on the surface. Huxley warned that a society addicted to pleasure would not need to be oppressed. It would police itself through craving. Because a person who cannot tolerate discomfort cannot resist manipulation. They will choose the easier narrative, the simpler explanation, the most soothing illusion, and they will defend it aggressively, because losing it would mean facing themselves. You can see the pattern everywhere. Entertainment that never pauses. Food engineered for craving, not nourishment. Platforms designed to reward impulse, not reflection. None of this is accidental. It trains a particular kind of mind, a mind that reacts instantly, consumes endlessly, and rarely reflects. Reflection requires friction. Friction requires discomfort. Discomfort has been framed as something to eliminate, so you eliminate it. You numb, you scroll, you binge, you distract. And in doing so, You lose something subtle but essential: your capacity to endure. Endurance is not about suffering for its own sake. It's about staying present when things are unresolved. It's about letting boredom sharpen perception instead of escaping it, letting frustration reveal limits, letting longing point toward meaning. But modern pleasure removes these signals before they can speak. You feel restless, so you consume. You feel lonely, so you stimulate. You feel empty, so you distract. And the cycle continues. Pleasure no longer restores you, it depletes you. Because the nervous system was never meant to be constantly soothed. It was meant to move between tension and release. When release becomes constant, tension has nowhere to go. It turns inward. Anxiety without cause, irritation without target, emptiness without explanation. You may think something is wrong with you, that you lack discipline, that you lack motivation, that you're weak. But Huxley would tell you something else. You are overstimulated, not broken. Your system is saturated, and a saturated system cannot feel meaning, because meaning requires contrast. Effort gives rest its sweetness. Silence gives sound its weight. Waiting gives fulfillment its depth. When pleasure is always available, nothing tastes like anything anymore. So you increase the dose. More stimulation, more intensity, more novelty. But novelty fades quickly. And when it does, you don't return to stillness, you escalate. This is how freedom becomes compulsion. Not overnight, gradually. You don't notice the moment pleasure stops being a choice, but you feel its aftermath. The difficulty focusing, the inability to sit still, the urge to escape the moment you feel anything heavy. Huxley saw that this kind of slavery feels humane. No one is punished, everyone is entertained. And that's the danger. A person who is constantly gratified never develops inner authority. They never learn to tolerate ambiguity. They never discover what they actually want beyond relief. So desire becomes shallow. You want what's easy, what's fast, what's immediately rewarding. And life quietly shrinks around those desires. You stop pursuing anything that requires patience. You abandon paths that demand long-term effort. You avoid conversations that are uncomfortable but necessary, not because you decided to, because pleasure trained you out of endurance. This is why so many people feel trapped in lives that look easy but feel empty. They have comforts, they have options, they have distractions, but no depth. Depth requires sacrifice, attention, delay. And delay feels intolerable when you've been trained to expect instant relief. So you remain dependent, not on a tyrant, on stimulation. This dependence is subtle. You tell yourself you're just relaxing, just unwinding, just enjoying life. But enjoyment without effort does not satisfy. It numbs. And numbness is not peace. It's absence. Huxley's warning was not moral, it was psychological. He wasn't saying pleasure is evil. He was saying pleasure without restraint is pacifying. It dulls resistance. It weakens discernment. It erodes the capacity to say no. A person who cannot say no to pleasure cannot say no to control. Because control no longer needs to threaten them. It only needs to offer comfort. And here is the most unsettling part. The more pleasure you consume to escape discomfort, the more discomfort you feel when pleasure is absent. This is how the trap tightens. Silence feels hostile. Stillness feels empty. Effort feels pointless. So you return to stimulation, again and again, until you forget what it felt like to be bored and curious instead of bored and restless, until you forget how to stay with a thought long enough for it to turn into insight, until you forget how to suffer meaningfully. And without that capacity, something essential collapses. Your freedom. Not political freedom, inner freedom. The freedom to choose long-term meaning over short-term relief. The freedom to endure discomfort in service of something real. The freedom to live deliberately instead of reactively. Huxley understood this clearly. A society that eliminates discomfort eliminates resistance. A mind that cannot tolerate frustration cannot oppose anything, not even its own captivity. And this raises a question you cannot avoid. If pleasure has become your primary escape from discomfort, what part of your life has been slowly slipping away while you weren't looking? When desire becomes a tool of control. Submerged does never meant to be the problem. It was meant to be a signal, a quiet indication of where life wanted to move next. A pull toward growth, toward experience, toward meaning. But somewhere along the way, desire was hijacked. Not suppressed, not forbidden, amplified. Huxley understood that when desire is constantly stimulated, it stops pointing inward. It stops revealing anything about you. It becomes external, programmed, predictable. You begin wanting what is offered, not what is necessary. And the more efficiently desire is satisfied, the less it teaches you. Think about how quickly you move now. From urge to action, from impulse to consumption, from discomfort to relief. There is no pause, no space for reflection. Desire used to open questions. Now it closes them. You feel an urge and you obey it, before asking where it came from, before asking what it's replacing, before asking what it might be avoiding. This obedience feels like freedom. But freedom requires distance. Distance between impulse and action, between craving and choice. Without that distance, you are not choosing, you are reacting. And reaction is easy to guide. This is where modern slavery becomes invisible. You are not controlled by fear, you are controlled by preference. Algorithms learn what keeps you engaged, industries learn what keeps you craving, systems learn what keeps you distracted, and they feed it back to you endlessly. Not to harm you, to profit from you, but the psychological effect is the same. Your attention is fragmented, your patience eroded, your capacity for sustained effort weakened. You become excellent at consuming, terrible at waiting. And waiting is where insight lives. Waiting is where discomfort sharpens perception, where confusion matures into understanding, where boredom becomes curiosity. But boredom is now treated like an emergency, something to eliminate immediately. So you never stay long enough with any state of mind to learn from it. Loneliness is silenced instead of explored. Sadness is distracted instead of understood. Anger is vented instead of examined. And because these emotions are never integrated, they return stronger. So you need more stimulation. This is the escalation Huxley warned about. Pleasure loses its capacity to satisfy because it's no longer connected to meaning. It's just relief. And relief has diminishing returns. You notice it in how quickly novelty wears off. How entertainment feels hollow minutes after it ends, how comfort leaves you strangely restless. You're not ungrateful, you're undernourished. Not materially, psychologically. A life fed entirely on pleasure starves something essential. the part of you that wants to struggle for something real, the part that needs friction to develop strength, the part that finds meaning in effort, not ease. Huxley saw that a society organized around pleasure does not need truth. It needs satisfaction. Truth is often uncomfortable. It disrupts habits. It demands change. Pleasure asks for nothing. It says, stay as you are, consume this, feel better. And over time, this message becomes internalized. You avoid questions that disturb your comfort. You resist ideas that require discipline. You dismiss paths that demand patience, not because they are wrong, because they are inconvenient. This is how desire becomes a tool of control, not by dictating what you must want, but by shaping what you can tolerate wanting. You become allergic to long-term effort, suspicious of depth, impatient with complexity, and this changes who you are. You begin living in short cycles, short attention, short goals, short pleasures. Life becomes a sequence of relief-seeking behaviors, and relief is never enough to build a life. It can only anesthetize one. You may notice a strange contradiction now. You have more access than any generation before you, more comfort, more entertainment, more choice, and yet motivation feels scarce. Direction feels unclear. This is not a coincidence. When desire is constantly fulfilled, it stops orienting you. It no longer points toward what matters. It just demands repetition. You want again, and again, and again, but you don't know why. Huxley saw that this produces a population that is easy to manage, not because it is stupid, but because it is tired. Tired of effort, tired of resistance, tired of discomfort. A tired mind does not rebel. It negotiates for comfort. It accepts shallow explanations if they are soothing. It adopts convenient beliefs if they reduce tension. It avoids anything that threatens its fragile equilibrium. And slowly, without force, the range of your life narrows. You stop doing things that don't pay off immediately. You abandon skills that require long apprenticeship. You give up on projects that don't reward you quickly. Not because you chose to, because your nervous system has been trained away from endurance. Pleasure has shortened your horizon. Huxley didn't believe this was malicious. He believed it was efficient. A society that keeps its people entertained doesn't need to silence them. They silence themselves, not with fear, with gratification. And this is why the pursuit of pleasure becomes tragic. Not because pleasure is bad, but because it replaces purpose. Purpose requires sacrifice. It asks you to endure boredom, frustration, doubt. Pleasure teaches you to escape all three. So you escape again and again until you forget how to stay, until effort feels unbearable, until silence feels threatening, until depth feels exhausting. And at that point, something essential has been traded. Your capacity for freedom. Not the freedom to choose between options, but the freedom to commit to something difficult, to something meaningful, to something that doesn't reward you immediately. Huxley knew this kind of freedom could not survive in a pleasure-saturated world, because freedom is demanding. It asks you to resist impulse, to delay gratification, to tolerate discomfort in service of something unseen. And pleasure teaches you the opposite. It teaches you that relief is always available. that discomfort is unnecessary, that effort is optional, until you no longer know how to live without stimulation. And when that happens, your desires are no longer yours. They are suggestions you obey automatically. This is the quiet slavery of modern life, not enforced from above, maintained from within. And it leaves you with a question that feels increasingly urgent. If your desires have been trained to avoid discomfort at all costs, how will you ever build a life that demands something real from you? The loss of meaning in a painless life. There is a moment when you realize that nothing actually hurts anymore. Not deeply, not sharply. And that realization should comfort you. But instead, it unsettles you, because pain has been replaced by something worse. Flatness. You still feel irritation, restlessness, mild anxiety. But the kind of pain that reshapes you, the kind that forces growth, rarely arrives. It's filtered out, buffered, neutralized before it can do its work. Huxley understood that suffering has a function, not as punishment, as information. It tells you when something matters, when something is misaligned, when something demands courage. But in a life designed to minimize discomfort, those signals are muted. You no longer feel pain strongly enough to change. You only feel it enough to escape. So you escape. From boredom, from frustration, from existential unease. You soothe it away with pleasure. And in doing so, you lose access to something essential: meaning. Meaning is not found in comfort. It emerges from tension, from commitment to something that resists you, from effort that costs you something, from sacrifice that reshapes your priorities. A painless life does not feel meaningful. It feels endless. Days blur together. Experiences lose weight. Nothing leaves a mark. You may notice this in yourself. How quickly experiences fade. How little stays with you. How often you move on without integration. Pleasure leaves no residue. It satisfies in the moment and disappears. And when your life is built primarily around what disappears, your inner life becomes thin. Huxley feared this thinning more than oppression, because a person with no depth cannot resist anything. They have nothing to stand on. They are not empty in an obvious way. They are full of stimulation. But stimulation is not substance. It keeps you occupied without making you solid. You begin to avoid anything that threatens your comfort. Long-term projects, difficult conversations, quiet reflection. Not because you are incapable, but because your tolerance has been lowered. You've been trained to expect relief, and anything that withholds it feels hostile. So you disengage. You choose the easier path, the faster reward, the shorter arc. And slowly, your life organizes itself around what is easiest to consume. This is where the tragedy becomes complete. You are not unhappy. You are unchallenged. And an unchallenged life feels meaningless. Not immediately, gradually. A vague dissatisfaction creeps in, a sense that nothing is quite enough, that everything is replaceable. You have not lost joy. You have lost gravity. Nothing weighs enough to matter. Huxley saw that a society built on pleasure would slowly forget how to suffer well. And without that capacity, it would also forget how to strive. Striving requires tolerating discomfort without escape. It requires staying with frustration long enough for it to transform. It requires resisting the urge to numb yourself when things become difficult. But pleasure interrupts that process. It offers an exit before meaning can form. You leave too early, again and again. So nothing matures. Your desires remain adolescent. Your goals remain shallow. Your commitments remain provisional. You always keep an escape within reach. And escape feels like freedom. Until you realize you never stay long enough anywhere to build a life. This is why the pursuit of pleasure quietly erodes purpose. Not because pleasure is evil, but because it trains you to flee the very conditions under which meaning arises. Difficulty, delay, depth. Huxley was not calling for asceticism. He was calling for awareness. Awareness that a life without friction does not develop strength. Awareness that constant gratification weakens attention. Awareness that comfort, when absolute, becomes corrosive. A meaningful life requires you to endure, not constant suffering, but chosen difficulty. The difficulty of learning something slowly. The difficulty of building something that may fail. The difficulty of staying with discomfort long enough to hear what it's telling you. Pleasure silences that voice. And once it's silenced, you may live comfortably, but you won't live deeply. This is the cost of modern slavery. Not pain, shallowness. And the longer you live without depth, the harder it becomes to recover it, because depth feels heavy when you're used to ease. Commitment feels frightening when you're used to escape. Silence feels unbearable when you're used to noise. But depth is still there, waiting for you to stop anesthetizing yourself long enough to feel what actually matters. And that leads to a question you cannot avoid much longer. If you removed comfort as your primary goal, what kind of life would finally demand something real from you? Choosing depth in a world that offers escape. No one took your freedom from you. You handed it over slowly, in exchange for comfort, for ease, for the promise that you never had to feel too much for too long. And it seemed reasonable. Why suffer when relief is available? Why struggle when distraction is endless? Why endure when pleasure is immediate? Huxley saw where this road leads. Not to collapse, to quiet erosion. A life where nothing hurts deeply, but nothing matters deeply either. A life padded on all sides until no experience has enough weight to shape you. You don't feel imprisoned. That's the danger. You feel accommodated. But accommodation is not the same as freedom. Freedom requires friction. It asks something of you. It asks you to resist impulse, to tolerate boredom, to stay present when escape is tempting. And these capacities are disappearing, not because you are weak, but because you've been trained away from them, trained to soothe instead of listen, to consume instead of confront, to distract instead of endure. Yet something in you still knows. You feel it in the moments after pleasure fades, in the emptiness that follows stimulation, in the quiet suspicion that you are being kept busy so you don't notice what's missing. What's missing is not happiness, it's meaning. Meaning doesn't come from feeling good. It comes from feeling invested, from committing to something that resists you, from choosing effort when ease is available, from staying with discomfort long enough for it to reveal direction. Huxley was not asking you to reject pleasure. He was asking you to reclaim authority over it, to stop letting it decide when you think, when you rest, when you turn away from yourself. Because a life organized around pleasure will never ask you who you are. It will only ask what you want next. And wants are endless, but purpose is selective. It demands sacrifice, focus, restraint. It asks you to say no to comfort, to immediacy, to relief, so you can say yes to something that takes time to grow. This is not a popular path. It doesn't trend. It doesn't entertain. It builds slowly, quietly, in the background of a world that is always offering you an exit. But it is the only path that leads somewhere. You don't need to punish yourself. You don't need to reject pleasure entirely. You only need to notice when pleasure is no longer joy, but avoidance. When it stops restoring you and starts replacing something. Silence, depth, patience. The moment you reclaim those, something shifts. You feel heavier but more grounded, less stimulated but more alive, less distracted but more directed. And that weight you feel, that's your life becoming real again. So sit with this before you escape into the next comfort. If you stopped using pleasure to avoid discomfort, what kind of meaning might finally ask something of you?